What's good? It's Wood. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I just want to lend a few thoughts on the upcoming super fight, mega super fight between Manny Pacquiao and Errol Spence, with Errol Spence's IBF and WBC titles on the line. The WBA didn't reinstate Manny Pacquiao's championship position, so only the WBC and IBF titles will be on the line. And I did a early thoughts video pretty recently. You could go ahead and check that out, but I wanted to lend a few thoughts before I do an actual preview and breakdown as we near the actual fight date. Right now, I actually just want to take a moment and to address some of what I have heard, both just in the public boxing sphere and also in the comments to my last video. And this was regarding people with more pro-Pacquiao sentiments, believing that Pacquiao was going to upset Errol Spence Jr. at the age of 42 years old. Now, I want to be clear and say that I believe that this is a super competitive fight. I don't expect this to be a blowout one way or the other. But the idea that Manny Pacquiao is going to beat Errol Spence like he's beaten, the other guys that he's fought throughout his extraordinary career, I just don't see what you're looking at. Or I at least don't think that you are really getting a comprehensive view on what Errol Spence is bringing to the table here. Now, I will admit, Errol Spence has never fought an opponent like Manny Pacquiao. Style-wise, combined with Pacquiao being a southpaw, a short southpaw with extraordinary hand speed and foot speed, ring coverage, energy expenditure, warrior spirit, experience, you name it. Manny Pacquiao is somebody who you cannot emulate or even get a near replica of. But by the same token, give me the opponent who you can point to Manny Pacquiao as having fought, who would make you feel comfortable in saying, yeah, I'm going with Manny Pacquiao here. Well, that fighter doesn't exist. Now, Manny Pacquiao recently said, Errol Spence can't get any helpful information from Floyd Mayweather. Errol Spence is better than Floyd Mayweather, is what Manny Pacquiao said. Now, Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather obviously jab each other in the media in the same way that Oscar De La Hoya and Floyd Mayweather do, in the same way that Canelo Alvarez and Floyd Mayweather do. But I agree that Errol Spence and Floyd Mayweather isn't apples to apples. Style-wise, just physique-wise, nothing is really similar between the two fighters. So I don't expect Floyd Mayweather to be able to, upload all of his knowledge and information into Errol Spence's DNA and have Errol Spence execute a Floyd Mayweather game plan. It's just not going to happen. But Errol Spence doesn't need to implement a Floyd Mayweather game plan, in my opinion, to beat Manny Pacquiao in this case. He just has to do Errol Spence things to beat Manny Pacquiao. What do I mean by that? Well, Manny Pacquiao, I have heard people say, has already fought much bigger opponents. Look at Antonio Margarito, look at Oscar De La Hoya. Well, this was Oscar De La Hoya's final fight in his entire career. We weren't dealing with the same Oscar De La Hoya who fought Felix Trinidad, who fought even Fernando Vargas or Sugar Shane Mosley the first or second time. This wasn't even the same Oscar that fought Floyd Mayweather. We are talking nearly retired Oscar De La Hoya. Got stopped, in fairness. Manny Pacquiao looked brilliant, and Oscar De La Hoya could barely land a glove on Manny Pacquiao. But again, this was Oscar De La Hoya on his way out of the fight game. Very different from a 31-year-old Errol Spence who's coming off of beating Danny Garcia. So, citing Manny Pacquiao's 2008, this is 13 years ago, victory over Oscar De La Hoya, to me, doesn't mean much in the context of Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence in 2021. Also, I've heard, Antonio Margarito. Are we really going to compare Errol Spence with a post-Sugar Shane Mosley knockout version of Antonio Margarito? Antonio Margarito was a guy who didn't really care too much about defense or getting hit. He was kind of a bite down on the mouthpiece, come forward, pressure the guy, and just know that I can take your punches better than you could take my punches. Okay, well, good luck implementing that against a prime Manny Pacquiao. But no one should ever confuse Antonio Margarito with Errol Spence Jr. Also, when is the last time you've seen Manny Pacquiao fight a good southpaw? Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't Keith Thurman, Adrian Broner, Lucas Matisse, Jeff Horn, Jesse Vargas, Timothy Bradley, Floyd Mayweather, Chris Algieri, Brandon Rios, Juan Manuel Marquez, Shane Mosley. You would have to go all the way back to 2009 in his fight versus Miguel Cotto, and Cotto is known to be a southpaw, even though even Miguel Cotto would be considered an inverted southpaw, where you might naturally be a left-hander, but your boxing stance is that of an orthodox fighter, where your left hand is your lead hand. So it's not the same fighting construct type of southpaw that you're going to get with Errol Spence Jr. So this will be a very different experience for even the great and super experienced Manny Pacquiao. Also, how can we look at the age of 42 years old and just not react in some way that would indicate that it is a factor here? Look, I get it. He beat Keith Thurman in his last fight about 2 years ago. Now, is it fair to say that we really don't know what Keith Thurman has left post-surgery? Not even counting the Manny Pacquiao fight. Because in Keith Thurman's return fight before the Pacquiao fight versus Josecito Lopez, we saw a much more vulnerable Keith Thurman than ever before. You'd have to go back to his fight against, I think, was it Diego Chavez, to find Keith Thurman looking visibly hurt in a fight. Actually, it wasn't Diego Chavez in 2013. I'm talking about Keith Thurman's fight against Luis Colasso, where Thurman was visibly hurt to the body. This was 2015, just before Keith Thurman would then go on to beat Sean Porter and Danny Garcia, and then be inactive for the next 2+ years due to injuries and injury setbacks. So when he eventually came back to fight Josecito Lopez and then Manny Pacquiao, what version of, or let me put it like this, what percentage of 100% prime level Keith Thurman were we then dealing with? 80%? 70%? It's tough to quantify, but I believe this wasn't the same Keith Thurman that beat Sean Porter. I'm sorry. And that's not even to take anything away from Manny Pacquiao's split decision win over Keith Thurman. That was still a tremendous feat, because let's keep it real, Keith Thurman was still an undefeated fighter at the time, so that has to be acknowledged. I just don't think that 2019 version of Keith Thurman that fought Manny Pacquiao is comparable to 2021 Errol Spence, all right? Also, in that Manny Pacquiao versus Keith Thurman fight, Manny Pacquiao was 40 years old. We are now 2 years removed from that. Now, granted, being an older fighter, maybe taking more time off between fights is a good thing, just in terms of body rejuvenation, preservation, so forth. But there's also the age component. So yes, he might have had more time to heal and recuperate, but you're also tacking on more biological years to Manny Pacquiao. He's 42 now, not 40 years old. So granted, we haven't seen Manny Pacquiao totally look old yet, but you know it's going to happen. And what more likely of a time than when you've taken a huge chunk of time off between the ages of 40 and then 42, and then come back against who I have as the second best pound for pound fighter in the entire sport of boxing. I do believe that age matters in this case, especially as you start getting into the middle and later rounds, but we'll get to that. But there's also the component of, okay, the size of the opponent, right? Keith Thurman, 5'7", around 5'7". Adrian Broner just under 5'7", like 5'6.5". Lucas Matisse is under 5'8". I think he might be 5'6", 5'7". Yeah, Lucas Matisse is 5'6", Jeff Horn 5'8". Now Jesse Vargas, who Manny Pacquiao fought in 2016, is 5'11". So okay, that's the last time Manny Pacquiao has fought a significantly bigger opponent. That was 5 years ago. Manny Pacquiao was 37 at that time. Manny also fought Chris Algieri, who's a taller fighter, 2 years prior in, I think, 2014. And by the way, I'm only drawing the guys in the last like 7 to 10 years because, yes, Manny Pacquiao had an outstanding Hall of Fame career even before, well before the points that I'm talking about. So Manny Pacquiao has basically had like 2 or 3 Hall of Fame careers in one. It's amazing. But I'm only bringing up the more recent fights because we can agree that this isn't the same Manny Pacquiao that was fighting, Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales back in the day, right? So Manny Pacquiao, again, has fought taller fighters, but I'm just talking about the combination in Errol Spence in being a taller welterweight, a bigger welterweight with a longer reach, 72-inch reach, the same as Floyd Mayweather's, which is oddly 2 inches shorter than the Terrence Crawford 74-inch reach. Very interesting. But it's the size of the fighter, just the overall quality of the fighter, not to mention they're a southpaw, a very hard-hitting southpaw, with a tremendously improving jab. I'm not going to say that that Errol Spence is going to control Manny Pacquiao in the way that he did Mikey Garcia or Danny Garcia for that matter. I'm not going to go there. I know that Manny Pacquiao is a totally different beast than both, and an athletic outlier that's unlike any fighter that Errol Spence has ever fought. Although Shawn Porter is known to collapse the pocket, I get it. Two very different things. But I do think that there are certain aspects or elements of Shawn Porter's game that Shawn Porter's more physically capable of doing than Manny Pacquiao. Just in terms of hopping into the pocket and sticking around for the long exchanges. Just toughening the fight out in that way. It's a very uniquely Shawn Porter way of fighting. I don't expect Manny Pacquiao to just stay in the trenches with Errol Spence and just let both of them let their hands go and see who wilts first. That's a very, again, uniquely Shawn Porter thing to do. But what I expect to see in this fight, and again, I'm going to do a full preview as I watch and rewatch more and more of their fights each and do further analysis. I'll do that at a later time. But right now, what I see playing out in this fight is Manny Pacquiao probably winning the first round, maybe second round. Manny Pacquiao, I expect to be the faster starter here. I do think that he's going to hit Spence with something that he doesn't really see in that straight left hand. I do think that he's going to get his early on Spence. I think Spence will slow the fight down at a certain point and will make a commitment to punish Manny Pacquiao in the earlier to middle rounds to the body. And yeah, that is a dangerous proposition, because if you start dropping your hands to hit to Manny Pacquiao's body, you are opening yourself up to Manny Pacquiao's punches up top. No question about it. And I do think that Manny Pacquiao's speed and power will be a bit of a surprise to Errol Spence, to where he's going to, question whether it's going to be worth it to invest to the body. But I think that him and Derrick James are game planning to punish Pacquiao to an extent to the body, but to keep that jab popping. I'm not saying that it's going to land at a super high percentage, but I do think that it's going to blunt Manny Pacquiao's frequency of attacks. And if Errol Spence is able to maintain distance, because here's the thing, unlike Antonio Margarito, right? When Manny Pacquiao jumps into the pocket against Spence, who's to say Errol Spence can't just take that long step back and make Manny Pacquiao have to, take 2 to 3 more steps to re-collapse the pocket as Errol Spence backs up and circles? Errol Spence isn't a Statue of Liberty who's just going to be there to be found. He will, one, try to make you pay, or at least try to stunt your rhythm and your timing by throwing out his jab, his right jab, which, again, Manny Pacquiao's not used to seeing a ton of right jabs from elite fighters. So if Errol Spence is even able to have moderate success in the early rounds with his jab and commitment to the body, then you mean to tell me that in the same middle to late rounds that Manny Pacquiao was kind of fatiguing a bit against Keith Thurman, that Errol Spence won't be able to take over and take control of the fight by that point? Now, I'll acknowledge there's certain things that Keith Thurman does from a boxing standpoint better than Errol Spence. I think that he's a better technical, sweet science fighter, or at least prime Keith Thurman was, in my opinion. Not that he beats a prime Errol Spence, but in terms of the hit and don't get hit, move around the ring, flash your speed while maintaining your defensive construct, I think that Keith Thurman was as good as just about anybody for a brief moment in time. But I think that Errol Spence's skill set is still developing. He's still getting better. Like, who wasn't surprised when we saw the way that he conducted that fight against Mikey Garcia? I didn't know Spence had that type of a back foot game in him. I seen Errol Spence blow out Chris Algieri and Leonard Bundu and fly out to the UK to take Kell Brook's IBF title away from him via stoppage. Granted, I have a lot of opinions on Kell Brook and the management of his career when he decided to go up 2 weight classes to fight Triple G, got his orbital broken, got stopped, and then came back down to 147 to defend his title against Errol Spence. That's just a tough way to go. But still, Errol Spence went out to the UK, handled his business to earn the IBF title, but we didn't know that Errol Spence had the type of abilities and skill set that he showed against Mikey Garcia. So I expect 42-year-old Manny Pacquiao, the legendary Manny Pacquiao, to slow down a bit in the middle to late rounds, and I think Errol Spence is going to surge to the point where he wins a clear, competitive, but clear decision against Pacquiao. I don't see Errol Spence stopping Manny at this point. Again, I'm going to think further on this stuff, but right now, as I sit and think about this matchup and what these two guys bring to the table, look, it's going to be southpaw versus southpaw. That's going to be a little weird for both guys, but I think Errol Spence's range, his power punching to the body, his movement, his youth, these things I believe will allow him to assert control by the middle rounds of this fight, and I think that he's going to win a relatively close decision. I'm talking maybe 116 to 112 type of decision. But again, I'm going to do a preview as we near the fight date. I want your thoughts in the comments. What am I missing here? Because I am taking the totality of Manny Pacquiao's historic career and skill set into consideration here. I'm also just taking age and the matchup issues that Manny Pacquiao is going to be facing in Errol Spence into consideration as well. But please leave your comments in the comments. I can't wait for this fight. Again, I am still super shocked that Manny Pacquiao is daring to be great by taking this risky of a fight. Now, you can say it's a win-win for Manny Pacquiao. I'm like, nah, man. Errol Spence is a tough customer. Look, when around the time that Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather fought, I was thinking there's no way in hell that Mayweather is going to take on one of today's elite, like Keith Thurman at the time, or Errol Spence, or Kell Brook when he was still a 147 elite. I'm like, Floyd won't do it, nor should he have to, because of how many generations he's been great. I was thinking the same thing, obviously, about Manny Pacquiao. Next thing I know, in 2019, he's fighting Keith Thurman. And then in 2021, this guy who was fighting Timothy Bradley like 9 years ago was fighting Shane Mosley 10 years ago, fighting Miguel Cotto back in 2009, that's 12 years ago, is now going to fight Errol Spence in 2021. Oh my God. So props to Manny Pacquiao for basically doing something that would be one of the most tremendous feats in boxing history. I look at this as being potentially greater than George Foreman knocking out Michael Moore to recapture the heavyweight title. Or, some of Bernard Hopkins's, post 40-year-old feats against very quality fighters. We're talking Kelly Pavlik, Antonio Tarver, Jean Pascal, and others. This Manny Pacquiao, if he beats Errol Spence Jr., will be about as amazing as anything that I've seen in the boxing ring. But yeah, let me know what you think about this. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.